The following are two stories about past lives. Billy Carroll. A woman by the name of Pat Carroll recounted a story about her son Billy. When he was about 2 years old, they baked a cake and used powdered sugar. Pat hated powdered sugar, so she never used it around him. Billy wanted her to make a certain type of cookie that his auntie made, so she had to get some of the powdered sugar and use it for the frosting. She sat Billy on the table next to her so he could help her mix things. When it was time to make the frosting, she opened up the yellow box of powdered sugar and her son asked, "What's that?" She told him that it was a kind of sugar that wasn't very good, but he wanted to taste some. So he put his little finger in the box and tasted it. Suddenly, the expression on his face completely changed, and he now looked deep and calm, and his shoulders dropped. He now looked much older than his age. He said, "Oh, that's what my grandmother used to use." His mother was confused because she knew that her mother never baked, so who was he talking about? She asked him if it was his other grandmother, and he said, "No, my other grandmother," and insisted it was his other grandmother. She asked, "Which grandmother are you talking about?" He said, "My olden days grandmother." She asked, "Who was your olden day grandmother? What do you mean?" He told her that this grandmother used to bake all of the time and loved to use this kind of sugar. He was smiling and very happy as he explained to his mother how she loved him so much and how he really loved her. Thinking her son must be dreaming about something else, she nevertheless continued to question him. "Do you have a mother?" And he replied, "Yes, I did have a mum." "Did you have a father?" He then looked a bit confused before saying, "There were a couple of guys who lived there sometimes, but I don't think they were my dad, and I don't know who they were. They were my mummy's friends." His mother thought it was a strange kind of dream for a 2-year-old to have, and knew that he hadn't seen it on TV because she always watched TV with him. At this stage, his mother didn't know what to think, so she stopped baking in order to give him her full attention. He then started to use words that were too big for such a little child, and felt that he was talking like an older boy. He was using full sentences, which was very unusual for him. He didn't pause, he didn't search for words, and he didn't struggle to describe things, like he normally did, and appeared very fluent. The words just flowed out of his mouth. She was surprised because he had never talked like that before. Has all this been triggered by tasting powdered sugar? She then pressed him for more information, but at the same time did not want to lead him. He looked happy and told her how he and his grandmother would sit on the back porch and look across huge fields and watch trains go by in the distance. He had obviously not got any ideas from their current home because they lived in an apartment and there were no trains around for him to see and no open fields. She asked the son what happened to his family and his grandmother. He became very sad and looked melancholy. He told her that his family didn't have any money and they couldn't keep him. She asked, "So where did you go?" He said, "They didn't have money to buy food, Mom. We used to go to the grocery store and the man at the store used to give us bread. And then one day he told us that he couldn't do that anymore unless we paid him. And we didn't have any money, so we couldn't pay him." His olden days grandmother used to make him cakes. He said they didn't have any money and they couldn't take care of him, so they had to let him go. She asked him whether he went to live with someone else. Billy suddenly got frustrated and annoyed at her question, and then glared at her saying, "No, they had to let me go, Mom." She told him she didn't understand, and again asked him where he went. He then looked deep into her eyes and said, "Mom, they gave me to you." She got chills throughout her body. She asked, "How did Daddy and I get you?" And he replied, "They had to let me die. I was 7 years old when I died. They were very sad, but they knew that they had to let me go because they couldn't take care of me anymore." "Well, how did you die?" He said, "In a car crash in front of a Toyota dealership when I was 7 years old." His mother was stunned by what he had said because there was no way he could have known what a Toyota dealership was. Dealership was one of those words that was totally out of his vocabulary. She asked Billy if he knew when this was or where he lived, and he said, "Hollywood." And she said, "Hollywood, California?" "No," he said, "Hollywood, Texas, in 1987. How could all this come from a 2-year-old? His mother worked at a research firm and was able to get a detailed atlas and found a small town in Texas called Hollywood Park. Later, when she asked him to tell her more about his grandmother, he went back to being a 2-year-old child, had no interest in telling her anything more. But every now and then, he would bring it up on his own and would tell her more of the story about his grandmother. Although he seemed to be close to his past grandmother, his grandmother was the big link. He would continue to talk about the back porch and watching the trains, but he was also hung up on the big man in the grocery store who told them that they couldn't have any more bread, saying he just doesn't understand. They just can't take care of me anymore. He would tell her the specific story about 3 times a year without changing any of the details. He always described the very strong love, his grandmother's love, and how much they loved each other. Then, as quickly as the memories came, they went. His mother asked whether there were any unusual fears that could relate back to this past life. She said that when he was in his car seat and her husband or she would drive with only one hand on the wheel, he would yell, "Hold 2 hands! Hold 2 hands!" over and over until they held onto the wheels with both hands. Her son ate a lot, and when he got home from school, he would eat at least 2 peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. He loved to eat anything, any time, and would get very wild when he was hungry. When he was old enough to go to kindergarten, and on his first day, she went to pick him up and was eager to hear how his day went. But as soon as he got in the car, he threw his bag down in disgust and cried, "I hate it. They didn't let me do anything I wanted to do. Don't they know that I'm supposed to be in 2nd grade? He said that because when he died at age 7, he would have been in 2nd grade. Gaynor Marsh. 2-year-old Gaynor Marsh came from the Isle of Man, near the UK. One morning her mother was about to make her some porridge for breakfast, but Gaynor said she didn't like porridge. Her mother replied, "How do you know because you've never had it before?" Gaynor replied, "I had it when I was a little girl before, and I didn't like it then." At that stage, her mother assumed she was making up a story not to eat porridge and ignored her comment. She then said to her mother, "When I was a mummy, I never made my girls eat things they didn't want." Her mother asked, "What little girls?" "My 2 little girls when I was a mummy. I didn't shout at them either. I was a nice mummy." Gaynor said how she used to play with her little girls and how she taught them to sew. She also liked to pick blackberries, and her girls would watch her make blackberry jam. Gaynor also described their clothing, such as long frocks that went down to the ground. One afternoon they went out for a walk down a narrow country lane and came upon an old cemetery. The moment Gaynor saw the graveyard, she got excited and then shouted out, "This is where I was born." This strange incident took her mother Marjorie back to something unusual that happened when Gaynor was only a few months old. One evening when Marjorie had gone to bed, she suddenly found herself in the doorway of a room she didn't know. The room was illuminated by a pinkish-orange light. In the room was a family that she had never seen before. There was a mother and a father and 2 children. They were wearing old-fashioned clothing that looked as if it had been handmade. The woman had an ankle-length dress made of coarse brown linen. It was gathered at the neckline and waist by a cord. There was a long white apron over the dress, like an old-fashioned pinafore. The father sat by a blazing fire while the children played and laughed. The room was sparsely furnished and the family looked fairly poor. The furniture in the room looked very crude, with a large wooden table and wooden benches. The father was sitting on one of the benches, smoking a strange-looking pipe with a very long stem. He wore a lightish-coloured shirt and a dark brown jacket. Marjorie had a feeling that the scenario she was looking at appeared to be from around the 17th century, and although they looked poor, it was not abject poverty. As she stood there observing, she half expected them to turn around and ask her what she wanted, but they just ignored her presence. Marjorie felt drawn to the mother as she was setting the table for a meal using wooden plates and bowls. She was standing with her back to the fire and could see she was in her 20s. Her hair was tied back with a scarf on her head and her sleeves were rolled up as she served the food. She then felt herself being pulled backwards, where the doorway got smaller and smaller until it resembled a black tunnel. Then it seemed like a small black hole until she realised she was looking at the pupil of an eye. That eye was the pupil of a baby Gaynor lying in the cot. Then the next moment she was sitting up in bed and staring around the room. It appears that Marjorie had had an out-of-body experience where her astral body had appeared in front of the previous life of her daughter Gaynor. That the mother in the scenario was actually Gaynor in that past life, and she had a strong impression that the young girls playing on the floor were the two girls that her daughter would later talk about. What was it in that moment that allowed Marjorie to be taken back to the previous life of her daughter from around 300 years ago?